The future doesn't belong to the busiest leader. It belongs to the one who can see it first. Welcome to The Vision Architect, a podcast how bold visions are created, communicated, and turned into reality. I'm your host, Simon Vetter. Welcome to The Vision Architect. I'm excited for another episode today. We have Brad Lee. Little background about Brad. He started his career in sales marketing in medical device. And then for 13 years, he was the CEO of Breg. It's a leader in orthopedics. And so we're going to talk a little bit about his experience as a CEO. And then the last few years, he moved into CEO coaching and advising CEOs. And also he uses an approach called scaling up, how to help companies scale. So we'll address all those topics under the umbrella of how to create a compelling vision. Brad, welcome to the show.
Well, Simon, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm looking
Wonderful.
forward to it.
So let's dive into your role as a CEO.
Okay.
Now you coach CEOs, but when you were CEO, especially in your early days or early years, what do you wish you knew that what you know now?
Yeah, there's so many things, Simon. It's interesting. I was noticing in some of the background information you sent me ahead of time, you were talking about catalysts to change. And that was a big catalyst of change for me, was that I realized after 13 years in the role, how much I didn't know the first day I stepped into the job and how valuable it is to understand and learn through that process. So I was very underprepared for my role as a CEO, and I had it's interesting how these things stick with you. I can remember the smell in the room when my head of HR, about 3 months into the job, walked in and said, "Brad, if you don't tell us where we're going, we're not going to be here to support you. And you need to figure this out." And it was really the first wake-up call I had about setting vision, about setting direction, and helping people put themselves in a position to be able to connect with a higher purpose around the organization versus not having that emotional attachment to what the company was doing. So that was a very important thing for me. And as I went through that catalyzed a massive learning curve for me. And also was a big catalyst for me to transition into CEO coaching, because I realized how critical it was for people to not just communicate what we need to do, but why we need to do it and why it's important to us as an organization. So, yeah.
Let's unpack that a little bit. And that question that your HR manager asked is really at the core. People want to belong to an organization where they see a future. And it's not about what to do. It's not about the goals. They're all important aspects, but it's how do you create that emotional connection where people have a sense of pride and commitment to the organization? How did you learn to craft, communicate, and articulate that vision, that future direction where people started to engage?
Yeah. So I was very fortunate. First of all, I was in the medical device space. So there's a pretty compelling reason to be. If you're a medical device provider, you're saving lives, or certainly improving the quality of a patient's life, and many times the caregiver's life as well. So I was lucky that I started from that base, but I really did. I mean, to your point, Simon, I really didn't understand, what framework or approach would help me really clarify not only a purpose, but the purpose that really fit us as an organization and where we were and the capabilities we had or we could evolve into. And so I actually leaned on a lot of the good to great dynamics from Jim Collins. And I'm sure you're very familiar with his work, but he talks about the Hedgehog concept, what you're passionate about, what you can be best in the world at, and what's your economic engine. And so we spent a lot of time really diving in as a senior leadership team and trying to be very candid and objective about, okay, what could we really be best in the world at? Not what do we want to be best in the world at? What actually do we have the capability to do? What are we passionate about? And I made a lot of mistakes along the way as we, fumbled through that process. But that was the core of the work that we did, was to leverage that framework and the flywheel that Jim Collins uses to talk about perpetuating the momentum in the business. We use that a lot as well. But that was the start of my education around that, really understanding. And after that, I, of course, branched out into many other areas to try to learn more, but it was all self-education for me along the way, which is one of the things that I realized at the end of my tenure. Like, why does it have to be that way? It doesn't have to be that way. Like there are plenty of people like you and others in the world that can support you and walk you through that process, which I wish I had, at the time, but learned a lot going through that.
What framework do you now use to help CEOs craft that path forward?
Yeah, so a lot of the work I do now, Simon, is with founder owners. And so a lot of the work I do now is really getting at the root of, why did you start this company? Like, what is behind that? Because I think, particularly many founder-led businesses, they start with a passion, they start with a perspective of something they're trying to change and make better in the world, and they lose sight of that over time. And it becomes more about the daily grind and the annual objectives that need to be hit. So I spend time with founders. Let's go back and explore what happened, what put you in a position to take the risk you did, to take a second mortgage out on your house, to do whatever you did to put yourself in a position to create this company and get where you are today. And let's package that up so you can tell that story very, very effectively to the others in the organization. And what I also find, Simon, is that there's kind of a tough reality that hits at that point. There's some people in the organization that are not aligned, and there are a lot of people that are, right? And so I run into, some reaction from the leadership team, like, well, we don't want to do that. Some people might leave. And my reaction to that is,
that's good.
It's probably not a good fit.
And
right?
sometimes we cater to the people who are misaligned too much.
Exactly. And so being definitive and clear on that purpose, and I've also found that, over time, what the driving force or the emotional drive to found the company may have evolved a little, but at the core, a lot of that is still in place. And so that's where I do most of my work now. And then in other organizations where it's not founder led, I really spend time focusing on the Hedgehog stuff with the organizations that I work with. Like, what are you guys really passionate about? And let's get off of your wish list and let's get on to reality and why do you wake up every morning and come in here?
Right.
To do what you do.
It's interesting you said about the alignment. I work a lot with teams and companies who go through transition. And then the leadership team or the CEO or the leader kind of sets the new direction. And what happens, 80, 90, 95% want and welcome that new direction. And there are people who are not getting on the bus. And they self-select themselves and move off the bus, which is a good thing.
It's a great thing. Because they are slowing you down or creating friction in the organization. And without you setting that new direction, I always refer to it, it's like melting the snow and you see the stumps. Well, that's what that does. It melts the snow, and now you can see the things that are going to get in your way from gaining the momentum and reducing the friction and drama that you have in the business.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the emotional commitment, and then give people a sense of purpose and motivation. Mm-hmm. How did you tell the story? How do you create a story for people to feel like, I want to be part of this journey. I want to be part of this company.
Yeah. So when it probably took us, Simon, 18 months to 2 years to really, and we were always clarifying kind of, not only the vision and the purpose of the organization, but what that meant to us on a daily basis. But after about 2 years, we had a pretty good sense for it. And then we really looked around at the storytelling opportunities that existed to support the impact we were having on achieving our vision and having an impact on the purpose that we were really trying to achieve. And so we had monthly all hands meetings, and we would bring stories into those meetings to help people see the connection. This is what you're doing on the manufacturing line, or this is what you're doing on the customer care team, or this is what you're doing in the finance team. And here's what we did. Here's the impact we had relative to what we said we wanted to do in the market. And our real focus was simplifying and elevating the orthopedic patient episode. Let's take as much friction out of that as we can, and let's bring as much joy and satisfaction to not only the patient, but the caregiver. And you would hear stories about physicians partnering with us and talking about how much easier it was to service and support their patients in the clinic as a result of the products and services we had put in place and the people we had hired. And so it was really the storytelling to reinforce that we were making progress against what we were doing. And by the way, we identified some things that could put us in a position to do it even better. And so we told those stories as well. Like, here's where we fell short on simplifying the orthopedic episode, and what can we do now to put ourselves in a position to do a better job there.
Yeah. What do you enjoy most about being a CEO, and what was most annoying or most difficult?
That's a good question. So what I loved about being a CEO the most was being surrounded by really talented, capable folks who pushed me to be a better version of myself and had this kind of endless passion about what we were doing for the business. And that wasn't always the case. Like, on my team, I didn't always have the alignment. Of course, we did as good a job as we felt we needed to select the right people, but we missed sometimes, and we didn't always get that right. And so, but when over time, when that team evolved and I was working with that caliber of individual, it really didn't matter to me what we were going to be working on. It was being with that team and being in a high performance environment that was just phenomenal. What did I dislike the most about it? I think I'm more of a visionary than I am an operator or an integrator. So I definitely have a lot more passion around the strategic elements of the business and the vision and purpose elements of the business, and getting into the grind of the financial management and the operational management. It's all necessary, and I did it. And it was my least favorite part as well. Yeah.
I think this high performance environment is absolutely a key success factor, and especially when the team is aligned and unified around a common direction, we call it a vision. And because if we have two visions, it becomes a division and it becomes misalignment. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, how do you get the team running in the same direction? We all run fast, but if we don't run in the same direction, it becomes
very hard
and conflict loaded. And so, do you have any advice or any tools that helped you bring that team together?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think and this is something I learned over time through the School of Hard Knocks, is that the frequency with which you remind yourself and keep the overarching purpose and vision of the company in front of yourself and measure your activities against that outcome. And are they having the impact that you think? Things change. You set your strategy, you set your vision, and so many times that's not revisited frequently enough. And your execution starts to drift away from your strategy and purpose because things happen. And you have competitive threats, you have environmental threats, you have things changing in the market that you're reacting to because they're all probably good decisions. And slowly but surely you become misaligned with what you were trying to do. A good example for us is we were not the low price player in the market. Well, a big competitor comes in and lowers their price, and you're going to lose a big customer. And then all of a sudden you're off chasing that and realizing that, that's probably not the right customer for us, and going back. And so I was talking earlier about our all hands meeting. We just reviewed that every single month in the meeting. We would bring back to, here's where we're headed. Here's why we said we were going to do that. Here's what we started the year out doing. Here's how it relates or doesn't. Here's what we've changed. There were many times we would get in that meeting and say, you know what, we thought this was going to be the way we would impact it, but we need to change because we've got new information and things change. I think that's one of the most challenging things for leaders is to balance the diligence with flexibility and being able to understand now is the right time to stay the course. Now is the right time to change course. And the really strong leadership teams drive themselves to do that. And that helps you stay aligned with the purpose and helps you be in a position to do a better job of supporting that. So that frequent interaction, we did it monthly with the entire company. And then as a leadership team, we would do it once a quarter separately and spend 3 or 4 hours making sure we had connected the activities to what we were trying to accomplish.
Yeah. Now, the role of a CEO, you have to work with a lot of different stakeholders. Of course, your management team, the employees, and then with you were a VC-backed company, and then you have customers, you had patients, you have surgeons, you have hospital systems. How did you balance and how do you work with the expectations of all those different stakeholder groups?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the tools we used, Simon, is that there's a framework we use called the balance scorecard, which really has you focus on the things that are needed to do to support all those elements of your business, your investors, your customers, your employees, and making sure that those key stakeholders are routinely considered and part of what you're doing. And I think the answer to the question is we picked the biggest gap to desired performance at any given time. Sometimes it was investor, sometimes it was customer, but we worked really hard to say this is what good customer interactions and satisfaction look like. This is what good employee satisfaction looks like. This is what good investor satisfaction looks like. And again, we monitored it every single month so that we knew, okay, we've got a drift here on our customer satisfaction. We need to over invest in that area right now. And then 4 months later, it may have shifted to investor or it may have stayed at the customer. So I think getting super clear on what success looks like with those stakeholders first, and then being able to balance that against the other things going on in the organization to make sure that one's not overweighted or underweighted in the focus that you have.
Now you are a CEO coach. You work a lot of CEOs. What do you see are some of the key challenges, the biggest questions they come to you for?
Yeah, I'm working with a lot of organizations, Simon, that are, like I mentioned earlier, they are founder led, and there's a lot of generational transition or either family generation or generational leaders. And what I'm finding is that so many leaders, and I wasn't a founder, but the same thing applied to me, feel like your number one job is to solve problems and to be a key element for the success of the business. And actually, that's not your job. Your job is to create the capabilities that are necessary to problem solve and make decisions inside the organization and reduce as much as you can your need to be involved in that. And so that's what I see as one of the biggest challenges with the CEOs I work with, because they got where they are because they're very good at what they do. They're very good at what they do. And it's highly likely nobody in the business is as good as they are at the things that they're good at. And that is a very difficult thing for somebody to release and to transition the accountability and responsibility to others in the organization. That's one of the biggest challenges I have. The second one is related to that, which is when they do that, there's not enough support and accountability established with the recipient of that responsibility, and that outcome. Because they're very good at it, they just assume somebody else can be very good at it. What they don't know is they have a superpower, and not everybody has that. So you don't just walk onto the field as a super athlete. A lot of times you have to train and you have to have the support. And I see the lack of that at the necessary level for the recipient of this new responsibility, which is it's on the leader to provide them with that and get them prepared, or find the right person to do it, because sometimes you pick the wrong person. And being very clear about who that is. So those are the two things I spend a lot of time on with CEOs.
One of the concepts I use with leaders is there are 3 time frames. You gotta deliver and perform in the now, you gotta plan the next, and you have to create the new. And to your point, most people are in performing the now, problem solving, task management, focusing on this and that. You do some perform the next, budgeting and planning and resource allocation. But most time, they don't spend enough on creating the new. Who is the successor? How do we develop talent and capabilities to be competitive in 2, 3, 5 years? What systems and operations do we need to start building now? And so it's like that short-term focus gets in a way. And I think leaders need to have more that long-term perspective. But again, the longer you go out, the less uncertain it is. And so it's like, what advice do you have for a CEO who gets caught up in that short-term mode?
So what's interesting about it to me, Simon, is it's hard for a CEO to see the risk of doing what you're talking about until they make a big mistake. And so sometimes it is helping somebody get to the mistake fast so that they really see the impact of not doing a good job here. So sometimes, and other times there are open-minded leaders who understand that. I think, again, the discipline that you have to frequently put that topic on the agenda. We talked earlier about balancing investors and customers and employees. I think there's an equally important discussion on balancing short and long-term planning, right? And execution. And I think the thing that sometimes sits with leaders that's difficult is when you sit down and you put your 3-year plan together. I think anything longer than 3 years is kind of silly because too much changes. But and even 3 years is a long time. And something changes that makes your 3-year plan not the right plan. Don't be so upset about changing direction. It's what we were talking about earlier about the diligence versus the flexibility. And don't be worried by that. It's not that you made a bad decision. You made the best decision you could with the information you had at the time. Guess what? Things have changed. And that's just life. That's just the way things happen. And so giving yourself the grace and the flexibility to change what you're doing, I think helps people get more comfortable with the long range planning, know that they're not locking themselves into anything, or they're not going to make any investments that won't be valuable later. But it puts you in a position where you're constantly thinking about that and seeing what needs to come up for you.
I have a technology client, and the technology changes so fast and rapid, and it's really hard to predict and say, hey, where we're going with this technology. And so my philosophy is the next best thing is, how do we create a team environment? How do we create a culture? How we communicate, hold each other accountable? How do we challenge each other? How do we listen to each other? And create a way of helping people understand how we work together.
Mm-hmm.
And because that prepares the team to make decisions when decisions are due, which could be very short term. And so what do you see is your approach to creating that culture, that team environment, and establishing values people
Oh,
live
yeah.
by?
Yeah, you might be sorry you asked me that question, Simon. It's something I'm very passionate about. Um, so I learned a lesson. We were talking earlier about stories. I learned a lesson about halfway through my career. I was with an organization. I'll tell a real brief story. And we had been purchased by a venture capital firm, a heavy, heavy debt load, and the company started to falter, very close to bankruptcy. And the CEO was a turnaround guy. He came in to turn the company around. And I remember I was in a staff meeting. I worked for him at the time. I was in a staff meeting. He goes, I don't know what to do. He said, I've pulled out every trick in my bag of tricks, and I have not been able to turn this organization around. He said, I was talking to some colleagues of mine, and they talked about how the importance of getting the team aligned and getting the friction out of the interactions with the team and how powerful that had been for them. He had never really put any weight behind that element of a company's success. So he leaned into it very hard for 18 months. Long story short, the company sold, it was about 55 cents a share at that time, sold for in the mid $20 range per share. So a massive increase in value. And what that showed me, Simon, was the point you just made, that if you take the friction out of the system as much as you can, and you put an environment in place that allows you to leverage the collective capabilities and insight of the team, it has massively powerful impacts. And so from that point forward, anytime I had the opportunity to influence the way people think and act together, I spent a lot of time doing that. It was a major, major component of what I spent my time on as a leader at Bragg. We called it the culture of accountability, and we talked about, here are the 4 to 6 ways that we are going to think and act together as a team. Some people call them values. We call them cultural beliefs. Some people call them operating norms. And we did something very similar to what we did with our mission and purpose and vision for the company, is we told a lot of stories about people doing a great job supporting the way we're going to think and act together, or not doing a great job. And we use those to hire, to performance manage, to fire, and they became a very bonding and cohesive foundation for the organization. And it was easy to tell when somebody wasn't aligned with the way we said we were going to work together. And everybody's way of working together is different. The CEO is different. The management team's different. Everything's different. And it doesn't really matter what those specific 4 to 6 things are. It just matters that you have them. And then you have and select groups of people who can support those operating norms.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the values or operating norms, when you look at companies, 80-90%, it's always the same. Integrity, respect, quality, performance. And I think the fact that you define them, and I like 4, 5 max, because
Yeah.
people have to remember those. If they don't remember them,
They're useless.
they become
They're
irrelevant.
totally useless. Yeah. And go ahead. I'm sorry. Good.
And to your point, use them for hiring, use them for performance management, use them for firing. And you established a culture that people know how to behave and act with each other. And the other thing is, it defines what's acceptable in that culture and what's not acceptable.
Right.
And not acceptable
Right.
behaviors are dysfunctional behaviors. That's the behaviors that create that tension and sucks a lot of energy out of the organization and is distracting.
Right. And to the point you were making, if you don't define what those are, nobody knows if they're adhering to them or not. They don't know. And so it's not fair to the organization to leave it up to them to operate the way that they see fit. And so it's super important, I think, to have them for sure. The point you made earlier about integrity and quality and excellence, to me, those are throwaway words because they're way too common. And the interpretation of what excellence means in company A and what it means in company B are totally different. So be responsible and take the next step and define what excellence here looks like and call it something else. Call it what it really is. Amazing customer experience. That's what excellence is here, right? And so that's to me very important to get away from the platitudes and the hanging on the wall. And if you're not talking about it at most every meeting in the organization, we had an approach we would take. We would start a meeting, and the first thing we would say is, okay, who has a story to tell about one of our cultural beliefs and can tell us how somebody supported it or where we found ourselves challenged. We weren't able to do what we thought as well as we thought we could. And so it was really challenging for us, or it was super clear what I needed to do because we had those in place, And so that level of discipline, and that's hard. That's really hard because everybody is busy and they think that there's not enough time to invest that way. It saves so much time. It's
Yeah.
more than pays off.
And I like the specificity of the story. It makes it applicable. It makes it relevant. Again, using a value, I always, when I work with a team, I say, okay, good, you have this value, integrity or innovation. What are 4 or 5 behaviors that demonstrates this value on a daily basis? So I got to get people to think. And one of the values of a client, they have accountability and competitiveness. It's a sales organization. And they say, we compete against our competitors, not among each other.
Oh, right. Yeah,
I
that's
see that
fantastic.
often. People who get promoted, they start to compete with their colleagues or peers. And it creates, again, it sucks out energy and it creates misalignment. It's like, we don't have to compete against each other. We have to compete against our competitors. And that mindset sometimes is just like, gets people in a way, those behaviors. Yeah.
Yeah. And to your point, you can go back and hire, fire, and performance manage against that dynamic.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, what's next for you? I mean, you're now working with all these companies, and what's your vision for the next few years? Where do you want to make a positive impact?
Yeah, so I started this business, Simon, with the real desire to help leadership teams succeed in their professional experiences and their business experiences and be able to balance the other elements of their life. I had a very, very challenging experience late in my career. When we experienced the pandemic, our company lost 65% of its revenue in the first 3 months when the pandemic hit. I thought we were going to have to declare bankruptcy. It was a very, very challenging time for me. And I came out of that on the other side. And one of the major reasons I left my job is it was just not putting me in a position to have the holistic elements of my life balanced and in place. And so one of the key reasons I went into doing what I'm doing is to partner with leaders and help them achieve it. It's absolutely achievable. You can absolutely have a phenomenal professional, family, partner, friend, and spiritual life. You can have all that. And so you asked me what's next for me is spending time making sure I'm continuing to support leaders to do that. And I focus on taking the friction and drama out of the business because that's usually where the leaders I work with, they default and ignore the other elements of their life because they've got all that. So if I can reduce the friction and drama in the business environment, they now have time and energy to spend in the other elements of their life.
I agree. You can have it. You can have a personal, professional, emotionally satisfying life. But again, it's not easy.
It is not easy.
What is the 1 or 2 key success elements that makes that happen and reduces the risk of derailing?
Yeah. So I'm going to sound like a broken record here, Simon. It's the same. what does success in my partner relationship look like? What does success in my friend relationships look? What is the success in my family? What is success for my professional? What do those look like? And keep them in front of you. Just keep them in front of you. And, we talked earlier about balancing investor and customer and employee. You balance those 5 elements and you're constantly looking at them, say, okay, this is out of balance right now. I need to make sure I'm having dinner with my family one night a week and I'm leaving work at 4:30 if I have to do that, and have the discipline to make that happen.
What I see, especially in bigger companies, people are really good strategizing for their product, for their department, for their organization. And then I start to talk about, okay, how do you strategize your life, your relationships, your family, your balancing? Right. And it's, I don't do that.
Right.
And then they wonder because they have issues at home, or they're overweight, or it's just all those things are not taken care of, to your point, because you're not putting enough emphasis on those elements. Yeah.
Yeah. As I'm sitting here staring at you into my camera, sitting above you are the 5 things in my life that are important to me. And they stay. So mine is, I have personal, family, friends, partner, and work. And I have specific targets under each of those. My objective I'll just read you. My objective for personal is engage in self-loving activities. And I have a list of the things that are important to me. For my family, here's my objective and around time. For my friends, these are the people I'm going to get really close to. These are the people that I want in the peripheral friend group. So I've gone through and specifically have those, and I keep them right over my computer screen because it's just that important to me to keep those elements in play.
Yeah. I got the same. I have a vision board with pictures. I have health, well-being. I have pictures what success looks like. How do I want to, like, one of them is having a handstand. I want to be able to do a handstand because
that's great.
If I can do that, I know I'm going to be fit.
Right.
I have relationship, romance, friends, family, social life, and then hobbies and adventure. And then I have business, my brand and what I do. And so I got those pictures just like you. And I look at it every day and say, okay, good. How do I organize my day today? How do I organize my week today to make sure in those all areas? And all of those areas, I evaluate 1 to 10, how I'm doing, at least every 3 months. And my definition of success is an 8 in all of those areas.
And again, like you said, like we were talking about earlier, if something's a 6, you've got to overweight your investment in that right now.
Yeah. And then what do I do differently? And where do I make some changes? What do I emphasize here? Yeah. So to your point,
I had it happen to me today. I had a friend of mine that I don't see very often, lives on the East Coast. He's in town. He said, hey, I forgot to tell you I'm in town and I wanted to see if we could get together. I said, I can't. I'm having dinner with my daughter. And that is the trait. Those are the things that you have to do to put yourself in a position. And without that sitting in front of me, I probably would have said, sure, Scott, let's get together and tell my daughter I could do it later. But that's the trade-off you make.
Good for you.
Yeah.
If you had to give one advice to a very busy, overwhelmed leader, what would you suggest he could start doing next week to get his life in order?
To me, it's fairly easy, which is most leaders that I interface with, and I certainly was this way, lack the level of vulnerability they need to exhibit to leverage the people around them that care about them and want to support them in being successful. They try to do too much for themselves and don't allow their ego to take a back seat. Show their vulnerability, leverage your partner, leverage your family, leverage your management team, leverage your friends. That is the one thing I would say. And I work on it all the time. I do a poor job of it routinely, and I find myself trying to get better. But that is the one thing I would say people can do for themselves, is to realize most people in your life are trying to help you succeed. Let them help you.
Wonderful. Yeah. I always
Yeah.
say if we sincerely ask for help, people are willing to help, but it has to come from the heart. It has to be genuine because people want to help, but we as leaders gotta ask and elicit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. This has been a great conversation.
Oh, thanks,
Before we
Simon.
finish, anything else? Where can we find you? LinkedIn or?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. Brad Lee, scaling up, and I'm a scaling up certified coach, and my business is Claris Leadership Partners. And so if I can help anybody, clarify any of the things we've talked about today or support them in putting them in a position to have a more enjoyable professional and personal experience, I'd love to help.
Thank you, Brad, for
Yep.
your
Thank you,
insights, your
Simon.
wisdom, your tips. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. Thanks.
Cheers. Thank you for listening. I am Simon Vetter, and you have been listening to The Vision Architect. If this episode sparked new ideas, share it with someone you care. Until next time, keep imagining the future you want to create and start building it.